right, I see we're recording. There we go. There's the live stream. Thanks. Don't forget to sign into the document. Looks like most folks haven't. Any new faces? I don't see any, but I'm also not in the right view. Okay. Release planning, any updates? None from distribution.
Nothing on the platform side that I've been aware of.
Nothing for implementation either.
Cool.
Nothing for the back team either.
All right, the only agenda item we had from the sync yesterday was to talk about the pack TOML proposal, the build pack config proposal, how they relate to project descriptor, and that kind of general discussion. I think Javier and I have kind of gone back and forth on this a bit, but we probably need to refresh since the break. So I'm not really sure where to start that discussion, and it probably is one that could go on for a long time. So if there's anything that we want to discuss first before this, it's probably a good idea to do that. So I'll give it a second if anybody wants to add agenda items ahead of that, especially anything that's more tactical. Okay. So just as a starting point or like a refresher, there was initially a proposal from me for what I was calling a special case of Project TOML, in which everything under the io.buildpacks namespace would be used in a pack TOML file that would also have things configuration that was specific to pack. And I think the goal there was like to enable parity in the pack options, like things like -- publish or any flag that you might add on the command line to pack build, that it could have an analog in a descriptor file. And I think in the past that's been difficult or not possible because there are things about those options that are unique to pack. Like publish might be a good example. Not every platform's potentially going to have that, or maybe publish isn't great. I'm trying to think of a good one, but there are definitely things that pack may do or opinions that it may have that another platform may not have, and therefore may make those options a bad fit for it, like a generic build packs project descriptor. And so my hope in doing, in creating this proposal was having something that wasn't dramatically different from Project TOML, but still scoped more to the build pack project and even scoped to pack. So when we talk about marketing, the marketing aspect of having a file in your repository that indicates this project can be built with pack, I feel like a pack TOML does a pretty good job of that. It's not, meant to be cross-platform, but that's the stance I'm taking. The other proposal was build packs config from Javier, which I think is meant to be, just jump in and correct me if I'm saying this wrong, Javier, but meant to be a descriptor that would be build pack, like generic build packs, and all platforms would and could support it. And I think you may even say that like, if something is provided in this configuration and you can't support it, then the build would have to fail. I know that's been talked about. I'm not sure if that's actually what's in the proposal.
I think at minimum warn, right? That was the real requirement. But yeah, other than that, I think everything else is accurate.
So yeah, so that's probably a good place to start discussion. I feel like, I mean, my stance is definitely that like aiming for something that can be supported across all platforms feels ambitious and I guess like limiting. Like I worry that there are aspects of the pack, like the pack, the CLI user experience in terms of the flags that you would provide and how you might serialize those into configuration file, that we might compromise on if we were aiming for something that was more generic. And so that's why I was favoring the pack TOML. So.
Yeah, and I'm trying to recall as well where we left off, and I think I have a pretty good idea, but I want to add to this, kind of context and maybe do it in the form of a question where we have the project descriptor and then the pack TOML, right? I guess I would ask, what are options that go in project descriptor as opposed to things that go into pack TOML? Or does pack TOML replace altogether project descriptor?
Actually, in my proposal, I talked just a little bit about how they could coexist. And because pack TOML would be like a special case of project TOML, we could actually have like an order of precedence where it's like project TOML and then pack TOML takes precedence, and then anything you provide on the command line takes precedence over either of those. So yeah, I was imagining that like project TOML would be the place where you would put things that are generic or the same across potentially multiple platforms. And if you needed pack specific configuration, you could use pack TOML. If you don't care about project TOML, you could just use pack TOML, that kind of thing.
I guess more concretely, right, if we dive into what things are in the project descriptor or would be in the project descriptor, what would you say those things be, at this point in time? Are there certain options that we know cut across all platforms? Because ultimately that's my concern, right? Is that on a project descriptor, if I take it from platform A to platform B, and I have certain options set, if the platform doesn't know or doesn't have sort of a conventional recommendation that it should warn or error out when those options are present, then the ending result from a user's perspective could be wildly different across different platforms. And I think that's an experience we've seen for one, and something I'd like to mediate.
Yeah, so your question was, I can't remember how you phrased the question, but I was going to say that there are things like builder, if the question is like what goes into the generic across all platforms, I think that is a difficult question. Like builder is an example where I'm not sure that we can expect platforms to support builder. And if the expectation is that, oh, we'll have builder, but then when you push to a Tecton based platform, it's just going to warn or fail, it feels like not a great experience to me, because we're saying that this descriptor, has an element that is builder and you can configure your builder, but really you can't. And you're in a sense lying. And so, in terms of the pack descriptor, I just did like a pack help and or pack build -- help, and like literally every one of these I feel like could or should be you should be able to serialize them into a descriptor so that you don't have to add them every time, or you don't, you can ensure that whoever's running pack build against your repo will get the same result kind of thing.
Yeah, and I definitely don't question and have no real pushback on the pack toml piece. It's really the project descriptor, right? Like I asked the question of what is the project descriptor if, like you said, we can't come to a consensus on what the finite properties should be that go into that file that then are really truly cross-platform, right? And I guess I would throw in the proposal that maybe we shouldn't have that, right? Like maybe those things don't exist. And really everything is platform specific. That's, completely on the other side of the aisle, but it doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere in trying to say or trying to articulate exactly what should go into project descriptor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, but I don't think I'm opposed to like having a bunch of platform specific config files, or at least letting each platform decide how to manage their config. That said, like some platforms may want something like Project Toml, but that doesn't mean we have to like invest in Project Toml, I guess. I think we were fine with Project Toml, or what we leave is maybe an extension spec or whatever for Project Toml being fairly minimal. I don't know, I haven't thought that through though.
Yeah, I mean, I think my last thought process was, what if in the project descriptor, we did still have the IO build packs namespace, but at the top level, there's not really anything to configure the build itself per se, but more or less platform specific, what is it called? Platform specific configuration. And I think Sam might have brought this idea up, where that platform specific configuration could obviously be different between pack, and there's another section for K-pack. So then you could configure, each individual platform all within one descriptor without having any real overlap. And then allowing the platforms to select and choose their configuration and use that.
Isn't this what the current product descriptor 0.2 gets you, except you're stripping away just the reverse domain, except for IO build packs?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things where, at least from my proposal, it's a step back and saying like, hey, I don't want to create a new file, right? Or restructure the existing file. I think reverse domain names still would work. I'm convinced of that now. But yeah, I think the part where I still have a lot of hesitancy and reservation is trying to create like a centralized set of configuration that not all platforms are going to respect. I think that's my real point of contention.
I remember whenever in the past we've talked about like platform specific configuration versus just like project specific configuration, the point has come up that as a user, like there are things that you think are like part of the entire application configuration. You don't care about whether that's being executed by a build pack or the platform. And I think that's why we didn't want like separate sections for like okay, this functionality is controlled by a platform, so it goes under a different table, and this functionality is controlled by like a build pack or something that's universally applicable to all platforms, so it goes under a different table, and so on. The other idea I had was, so it's largely inspired by how pip defaults to different backends. So you can specify that, hey, this is the binary, or this is the backend I'll be using to parse this file, and like select or apply configuration from it. And the platform just being able to say that, okay, I know how to fetch this backend, this build or project descriptor parser backend, parse things and then get things out. So that way, like each platform could have like an allow list of build backends it supports. So if for back, it can be like back, since it's pretty flexible, it can be like I support all project descriptor backends. And obviously it's pretty complicated because now you introduce this another piece of technology which is pluggable. Like you'll have to figure out how different organizations, like there's a Salesforce or Heroku project descriptor backend that supports certain properties. It can be passed on to Pack and it applies them. And then there's a KPack backend that Pack can support, but it's just cross-compatible so that if you use that, it works on Pack and also on KPack.
Is it transforming the descriptor and then passing it on? And yeah. I think that's really interesting. I'm not familiar with how that works in pip. That's what you said. Pip has something like that.
So
yeah, I'd be curious to read up on that. I'm really interested in that model.
The transforming part, I'm a little bit curious about, because I think last time we had this conversation, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't so much that we ended up finding out that there was no need to do the transform itself, since it would most likely do the applying of the configuration as opposed to like nothing else wants to read it afterwards, right?
Yeah, it was like transformation plus some common operations it can perform before it passes it on to detect, or like if before it passes it on to the lifecycle phases. So like it can trim out source code based on certain things, put things under the platform end directory and so on. So it's a combination of both. Like it's something that can take a project toml specified with that backend, knows how to parse the project toml and then apply the transformations provided in the descriptor before lifecycle takes over.
Is there a need to do that if, I guess, maybe an alternative, right, is if we simply had, because no matter what, I envision that whatever the quote unquote backend is, right, we're going to still run into the same struggle where I select a backend and let's say that the backend is not supported by KPack, right? Like it says, no, I don't want to use that, or I can't use that for whatever reason, right? Like I feel like we run into the exact same thing. So what if, still leaning on that, but we say, okay, every platform has its own set of configuration, right? And then they're still able to replace that functionality, that piece of function that parses that that set, right? Like I think we called it the prepare phase or whatever, right? The prepare phase is swappable, right? So the KPack prepare phase could be very different from the Pack prepare phase and so forth. So every platform could have its prepare phase, which looks for its specific configuration, namespace, and then applies the configuration at that point.
Then how would you have cross-platform compatibility?
There is none, right? I think that's the part where I've gotten a lot of pushback. That seems like a pipe dream.
I mean, one of the things I like about the project descriptor as it is right now is that at least whatever common functionality there is like works across like different platforms, and it just works.
You could have, sorry, go ahead.
The main reason I'm saying is like for local development use cases, like I've seen people always default to Pack, and then whenever they're pushing code to production or building like the production image, then some other platform takes over, whether it's Pack or Pack wrapped up in something else, or Tecton or KPack or whatever. So at least for me, what's important is Pack remain compatible with these other platforms. I don't care so much about like Tecton staying compatible with KPack. That definitely seems like a pipe dream, but I do want Pack to allow for that level of flexibility that whatever I'm doing in my, like whatever my production CI/CD pipeline is running, I should be able to replicate parts of it locally. Like that's a huge selling point right now when developing locally with build packs, that you can at least sort of replicate what's happening in your production container build pipeline.
Can you think of any possible properties or functionality that platform might provide that Pack wouldn't be able to provide?
Cross.
I think that's a tough one to answer because there aren't that many platforms that are as mature as Pack, right? I mean, I think we'd have to come up with a hypothetical.
The only one I can think of is the cross-platform builds we talked about, like being able to spin a Windows build at the same time as a Linux build, and then like pushing those out simultaneously. It might be doable with Pack. Seems difficult.
Yeah.
So like any configuration options that stem from there might be difficult to support in Pack, especially Windows when Windows gets involved.
So I'm going to go back to a simplistic solution, right? My simplistic idea of multiple configurations with different preparers that could all apply their set of configuration separately. And I think maybe trying to adhere to some of the things that might look good, where you have a central set of configuration that could apply to multiple platforms, right? I think like include, exclude, right? That would be nice if Pack and KPack and Tecton all applied the same include, exclude type stuff. And you didn't have to specify it multiple times in all these separate configurations. So I think that could easily be resolved by something like defaults, right? So maybe at the top level, instead of calling it, things that are required by platforms, it's more of like defaults that are applied and overlaid to the individual platform configurations. And if we wanted to, right, hypothetically, we could only talk about defaults for the most part, but then say, oh, now you could override it if you want to change the behavior for KPack, whatever that may look like. We could, obviously dive into the overlaying aspect of it, but that's something I think might work.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Javier. I think having consistent builds through multiple platforms it's pretty much a pipe dream once things get complicated. Like I think, right now, if you build something in Pack and then build something on a platform, there's a good chance there's like an environment variable that is on the platform that isn't being provided when you do a Pack build. Right? Like they could be running a completely different platform version, right? Because that has to be explicitly defined on the platform than it does in like Pack. Pack runs its own platform version. I don't know. I feel like this drift is not gonna like go away or resolve itself. So I'm not sure I feel too strongly, about introducing things that would make that gap any different. Like I don't think we're gonna. I don't know. I don't see that being a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear that I think the reason why I brought this up is to try to minimize that gap, right? Especially when we talk about us having a project descriptor, things that we start throwing into our documentation and say we support, but then you throw it onto certain platforms and you end up essentially not knowing that what you expected to happen happens, right? And you end up with two very different images. The different platforms and stuff like that, I could see them, like we should mitigate that as well. But I feel like we have a better handle on that as opposed to a file that has some properties that are just completely ignored.
So do we want a single file, I guess, that configures multiple platforms? Is that an end goal? Even
mean-
if it builds potentially differently on different platforms?
I guess I would ask the question of like, if we had separate files, then what's the point of project descriptor? But I will say that everything that I've stated thus far doesn't necessarily mean that PackToml cannot be a thing, right? Like basically PackToml could in one way or another by Pack itself be merged into this project descriptor when it's provided to the lifecycle.
So the value of project descriptor, if we don't want, if a goal is not to have a descriptor that works across all platforms, is for platforms that support project descriptor to use it for other things. And a really good example of this would be like Salesforce functions having an event type, and that event type actually influencing like the build packs you use or something like that. And what it allows us to do is have configuration that can actually apply to Salesforce functions as well as other Salesforce products, and do it in a uniform way and in a way that doesn't require having, 3 or 4 different config files for all these things that are part of the same project. So even if project descriptor doesn't support every build pack feature under the sun, I think it still has a lot of value, certainly to Salesforce as a subset of build pack configuration. And right now, I mean, I think our stance is that we're aiming at a subset that is that platforms are able to support across the board. Like, I think we could look at what. Actually, I'm not sure that's true. I was gonna say, I think if you look at what's in Project Toml now, you could say every platform has to support that. I think there might be things that are tough for Tecton though, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's already not true as soon as we added the builder, right?
But that's not in there, is it? Oh, it is in there. Yeah,
It is
yeah,
in
it
there.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's in there in an unreleased
But
version, so it's technically not.
it's in there. But even the Salesforce function is going to support Builder. I don't think so, right?
Yeah, I mean, I say like it becomes very difficult to try to promote anything from a platform specific thing. Like let's take Builder, for example, and move it to a now quote unquote mandated option, right? Because we don't have that control and maybe we don't want that sort of enforcement on the platform side of things.
Like, would you just move Builder into like a pack specific configuration? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's actually what I was proposing right here in PackToml. So it would go under pack.
The other option is just like put things in Project Toml and each platform specify a list of namespaces and keys it guarantees to support. And then if it encounters any defined key that is outside of that, it just says nope and warns or errors out. And you can, that way you could and then Pack could have a way to say that, like, disable this namespace or key. So even if it is defined in Project Toml for whatever reason, it doesn't apply that.
I feel like the allow listing or block listing is somewhat antithetical to having something that works across platforms. Like, I feel like it becomes very difficult unless we have a really good plan for how you advertise what features you support or what keys you do or don't support. I feel like at that point, it becomes really difficult to know that so you're using Pack, you write that build pack descriptor that's supposed to work on all platforms, but you don't really know, and I'm not sure you really have a way to validate that it would. So it's a totally reasonable like suggestion as a mechanism, but I think I worry about the experience,
Like, I was trying to encapsulate this whole logic into that build or prepare backend. So the prepare backend defines what it supports. So it maintains the allow list or block list, and the
Oh yeah. So
documentation.
that's kind of a good response to what I was saying. Is like we would have to have a good way to make that discoverable, and if we really standardize on that prepare or whatever that phase is, that might be part of it. People could publish that and share it or whatever.
So are you thinking, and to lean into that a little bit more, that the preparer would be some sort of distributable package in OCI format? It would have a label that has that information, and we would inspect that as part of selecting a quote unquote prepare phase?
Yeah, and I guess the prepare phase could say which platforms it's compatible with. I don't know, or vice versa. So the prepare phase says, hey, I'm compatible with Tekton and Pack. So Tekton, once it follows that platform API which supports this prepare phase in the future, can say, okay, this looks like I'm compatible with it. I'll try running it, and it gets back the output it expects. It's a whole new API, which I think Project Descriptor already is. Like we have the specification out there, but we don't have a good way of saying that, okay, here's how the platform overrides things in Project Descriptor. Here's how you handle different versions of Project Descriptor with different platform APIs. So all of that is currently absent. We just have the spec. So we need a translation layer anyway.
I'm opposed to the phrase transformation layer, and more like a consumption layer, right? Like we need to make that swappable, because yeah, even with the converter thing, there were so many holes or complexities in that for consumption. It seems like we're getting in alignment on sort of at least the ballpark of where we want to go, unless I'm misreading people.
Yeah, no, I think so. Maybe a good way to move it forward is to kind of return to what our customers are asking for, and see if we can keep what, like, the kinds of things we're talking about while delivering some subset of that or something like that, that addresses those needs. And the needs I hear, well, some of the goals are our own, but I hear people wanting to serialize pack flags. Like that's definitely a thing. Like I'm providing this thing on the command line. I want to be able to put it in my descriptor, as well as other things like that. You know, the images table is a good example of that, even if it's a little bit misaligned with pack. Another goal from our end is to have a descriptor that is specific to us in a very generic sense, whether it's build packs or pack or whatever, something that indicates that a project can be built with build packs or with pack. Those are the two concerns that I think are more immediate and need addressing. And if we can address those and not box ourselves out of some of the more, I don't mean this like in a bad way, but like elaborate solutions, I really like some of the stuff that Sam is talking about. Then we can always execute on that later or something.
I would like to throw in a third request from the users, and that's the one that I'm focusing on, is having the project descriptor be recognized by multiple platforms or across platforms.
I think I would second that. That's also something our users really like about our platforms right now. Like when they're testing things locally, they can use Pack and like have some like the same logic I spoke about earlier. Like that's just the main selling point, that like even if you want to locally reproduce those builds, you can. It may not be an exact copy, but it's a functional copy. So like at least functionally it would sort of behave the same. I have one question about the pack configuration options that you were talking about. Is it a global configuration or is it a project specific configuration? Do they want to specify flags that they keep on repeating across multiple projects, or is it like,
what I hear from people is project specific, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just haven't thought about it and it is actually global. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure if that is a good answer, but I think it's both.
because
Like I could imagine poll policy, or maybe even, so I don't know.
so pack already does some of it, like it exposes some of those things in the pack config options. If it could just expose more there, would that solve the issue, or do they need project specific things?
I think the problem with global only is that you can't commit it to Git, unless we're talking about moving that same configuration into where you can consume it from the project too.
Pack uses Viper, right?
Uses
No.
what?
Viper.
I don't
Cobra.
think so. Does it?
No, it's not Viper. It's the other one.
Cobra, right?
But Cobra is for CLI applications. Viper is the configuration library.
Yeah, like you could use both, and we have an internal tool that uses both, and we've had a lot of trouble with Viper. So I'm curious
Okay.
why you brought that up, but.
I was asking because a lot of our tools use Viper in conjunction with Cobra, and it makes it really easy to have multiple configuration files at different levels. So like you can have a global one and a project specific one, like similar to how Git works, where like there's a system user project specific Git config and it just works. Along with specifying the same things using command line flags or environment variables. So like all of those options are consistent and abstracted away by Viper. So like any command line flag we add automatically becomes an environment variable and becomes a config file like property that users can specify, and it's consistent. So that
was the same reason. That was the same reason we used it. So I mean, my negative comment should probably be explored more. Like we should still consider Viper if we're talking about implementation.
So that helped a lot. I don't know if it's just for pack, that may be an option, like for each command line flag you introduce in pack, if there's automatically a section generated in pack toml that corresponds to it, or whatever else.
So I missed a lot of what was said, so I do apologize, but I was gonna throw in that if we were to have a pack toml file at the project level, then we could very easily also include that at the kind of home directory pack config and use that as sort of defaults for any project stuff. So we could actually move away from or kind of overlay that as well.
Yeah, we could. I think would probably end up being a subset. Like I imagine you wouldn't have like project name as like a global
let them
thing,
do it whatever
right?
they want.
I mean, maybe, but yeah, I'm not even sure though. Some of those things I'm not even sure matter. Like, if we're really making a pack specific thing, do we want to put those things like version and project name that are in project descriptor? I'm not sure they belong in pack. Like that's not. I'm not necessarily sure that's something that pack would ever care about.
Agreed. It's
if you did care, like you were like, no, I want pack to generate like we don't do this today, but I want the image to default to the name of the image to default to the name of my project and the tag to default to my version or something along those lines, then maybe that's where you should be using something like project descriptor. And a platform like Salesforce could default the image name to the whatever project name is under com.salesforce or something like that, or the tag could be based on the event type in the Salesforce table. So then I think that my point in saying that is like that's where we're going off into a different tool or a different descriptor.
I feel like there's a set of tables, like images or builder and things that I guess maybe to Sam's point is like somewhat shared, but is not necessarily recognized by every platform or would want to be used by every platform. And I wonder if it's helpful to define schemas for that at some of the spec levels that platforms could support.
What would that look like, or how would that function from a platform's perspective, like contractually?
I guess I'm thinking of just like even like builder, right? Like if multiple platforms support builder, obviously Pack would support it, right? But are there a shared set of like tables or even like images? Like I can imagine.
Yeah, I think images is a good example. Yeah, different platforms handle it a different way, right?
Yeah, but like having a canonical, like you're saying, Javier, it would be awkward to force this into kind of the build packs namespace because not every platform would support it. So then you get into that case where it's just like, well, we don't have a better place to put it. So we're going to put it here, but it's not actually applicable to everyone. But it's also like, not like a rare thing for a platform to want to support these set of features. So I feel like there's probably a set of things. I'm sure if we sat down and thought about it, those are kind of the two that I thought off the top of my head, but I think we were being more probably thorough and complete. There's probably a set of tables like those that are probably common configuration, but it's not like absolute. Like we expect every platform to support all these things.
So I guess my question is, what would happen if you run across a platform that doesn't accept that, those properties? Like, do we contractually ask that they air out, warn, or if we
I guess I wasn't even advocating like they should be in kind of the IO build packs or whatever, like kind of default configuration. I guess like to some degree it'd be annoying if people had just different builder schemas, even if or they have to like figure out, right? Like I just look at even like the images table kind of discussion, like there's lots of ways to slice that. And if we actually got to a place where we are happy with where that is and actually tackles a lot of the use cases.
That's interesting.
Like it almost feels like there should be it like wouldn't be part of like the build packs namespace. It probably would be part of pack, right? But then like maybe it is just copy the thing in pack or whatever for your platform. But almost wonder if there's a way to kind of elevate these kind of more shared. I don't know. It's not like a fully fleshed out thought, but I just been thinking about some of these things where like we don't feel comfortable kind of uplifting it into common configuration. That we expect every platform to require, but it is probably somewhat common configuration, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder, are you thinking about trying to solve for defining types essentially, right?
I guess that would be like an equivalent in the programming language, like having these models or structs kind of that are kind of pre-canned that platforms could basically use. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm thinking, and maybe I heard Joe say this, where the RFC that's currently out there, right? How it defines the kind of deconstructed images or image names. And we would define that if you are describing an image, it must be in this format or should be in this format, whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and then if your platform wants to use that, right, like just use it in that format.
I wonder if we could fall into the idea of conventions as opposed to anything spec'd out. I know we've done that in the past for other things.
Yeah, I mean, that could be an option. It could just be part of documentation under platform operator, maybe.
Would we have some kind of linter or validator for the conventions? As in, would they be strongly expressed conventions rather than weakly expressed?
I don't think it would be. I don't think we'd be opposed to it to have a linter, but I mean, we don't even do linter stuff for Project Toml, right? Which is spec, so there's an RC for that.
And then, yeah, and then I do wonder if, we talked about like image names must be defined in this way. Like we wouldn't know of, let's say, custom properties that are images in essence. Because at least that's what I'm thinking about, right? So to me, that's a convention, is that if you're specifying an image name, it must be in this format.
I mean, one of the things we could do, I guess, on lines of what Aiden was saying, is that depending on the kind of validator or whatever things, we could define kind of like predefine at least certain schema things that they could pull in potentially if someone wanted to build their own validator based on some of our kind of I guess tables.
Yeah. All right.
So that
let's go back to XML and XML schemas. It would be great.
We had to build some of this stuff out for Salesforce for our Project Toml table. So I'm at least aware of some of that stuff, but that could be potentially a way that even if it's not required, you at least get there's at least a small carrot at the end of that stick of just like, oh, if you do use this kind of savage convention, you can kind of use these primitives already for at least getting validation and stuff like that. Because at that point, we probably could also just bake those into pack or something, right? Too.
Yeah, I know we've talked about schemas in the past and how that'd be great for the spec. I still strongly believe in that. I think I might have, maybe in the next mentoring session, I might try to throw that as something people could work on. But the linter is definitely new. And so I'm thinking like that seems pretty cool to be able to start linting stuff based on those schemas.
That just
So
feels
we got
data. Sorry.
no go yeah. So we got 5 minutes left. I want to make sure that we come away from this with something that will keep us moving forward. So if anybody has ideas, including if you have suggestions for things for me to do, it doesn't have to be something that you're doing. I'd love to hear it. We've got the 2 proposals out there. I feel like there's a lot of good ideas and a lot of alignment. But yeah, I'm not sure how to keep things moving. What are some good maybe action items or next steps?
So I wanted to first confirm I added very light notes on what our goals are, Joe, on the document. Could we confirm that those are accurate? Because I wrote them after the fact.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Those 3.
Cool. I know my goals are to create yet another proposal based on my vision of this, and then kind of, iterate on that. But I'd be happy to also see other people's proposals and see if we could inch closer to some sort of unified.
I mean, if you don't mind starting that, I mean, I think that's a good, I think it's a good place to start. And I'd be happy to like review early if you want to potentially short circuit work that you wouldn't need to do or something like that. So if you want to do it more with a tighter feedback loop than just like submitting a full on RFC, like happy to do that too. So
cool. Yeah, I might hit you up on that. I might use HackerMD or HackMD to do that a little bit faster.
Yeah, like that.
The thing that like stands out to me out of all of this is like we said, right, like if there was like some common set of conventions and that was implemented and recognized by all of the platforms, it'd be easier to implement a bunch of this. So like Buildpacks API is a common way to like for all platforms to implement some common functionality. And a bunch of these options are simply like they're not transferable across platforms because the API that the lifecycle provides is not flexible enough, or like for Buildpacks or something else to add those kind of extensions. Like there's nothing stopping a Buildpack right now from looking at the project descriptor, parsing it and adding processes, labels, environment variables, or whatever else. But like as soon as you get into concepts like changing the builder or changing the run image or the output image tag, that's where it all gets hairy. So the other option could simply be like if we could figure out like a platform level API to introduce all of these things that can be controlled by an API like the Buildpack API, but is more restricted so that like a platform can choose that here's the subset of functionality or things I want to execute. And that would also solve a bunch of these problems. Like to me, anything that a Buildpack can implement, like without thinking, we can put it in the project descriptor because a platform already supports it. So like that's one criteria I can think of like putting things in IO Buildpacks table. Like let's see if a Buildpack can do it. If a Buildpack can do it, then a platform can obviously do that, and it has to support it because a Buildpack is already doing it. And then that way, that's a clear criteria for, hey, this goes in the IO Buildpacks table, this goes somewhere else. And for all of those features, we can figure out like if there's some other API or extension we can hook into the lifecycle to provide all of that.
That's interesting. I'd have to think about that a little bit more, or maybe just experiment with some options and see whether or not that'll work. That makes sense.
All right, I need to drop. Yeah, let's keep it going. This is a really important topic to me, and I feel like it's a nebulous one too. But let's just keep trying to move things forward, and let me know how I can help. So.